The cafeteria went silent the moment Staff Sergeant Lance Whitaker's fist connected with Dr. Emily Stratton's jaw. 300 Marines stopped eating, forks frozen midair, as the trauma nurse staggered backward against the serving counter. Her brown ponytail whipped sideways from the impact. Blood traced a thin line from her split lip. Whitaker stood over her, chest heaving, his voice cutting through the shocked silence like a blade. "Apologize now, or I'll make sure everyone knows you killed that kid with your incompetence." What those 300 witnesses didn't know was that the quiet nurse bleeding on the cafeteria floor held more combat decorations than half the officers on base, and she had been waiting 8 months for exactly this moment. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. 6 hours earlier, the morning had started like any other Tuesday at Naval Hospital Camp Pendleton. Emily Stratton arrived at 0545, her brown hair already pulled back in the practical ponytail she wore every shift. At 32 years old, she had the kind of face that people forgot easily. Not unattractive, just unremarkable. Average height, average build, the sort of person who could disappear into a crowd without effort. She preferred it that way. The trauma ward in Building 3 hummed with the controlled chaos of a military hospital preparing for the day. Fluorescent lights cast everything in harsh white. The smell of antiseptic mixed with the burnt coffee someone had left too long on the warmer. Emily checked her assigned station, reviewed the supply inventory, and nodded to Hospital Corpsman Second Class Allison Gray, who was already prepping the crash cart. "Morning, Doc," Allison said, using the nickname that had stuck despite Emily's repeated corrections that she was a nurse, not a physician. Allison was 26, blonde, energetic, the kind of person who brought sunshine into rooms that desperately needed it. Quiet night in the ER. Maybe we'll actually get through a shift without someone doing something stupid. Emily allowed herself a small smile. It's Tuesday. Training exercises start at 0700, give it 2 hours. She was right, though she took no pleasure in it. At 0847, the call came through. Trauma Bay 2, incoming. Male, 19 years old, training accident. Suspected spinal injury, possible internal bleeding, ETA 4 minutes. Emily's demeanor shifted. The quiet, forgettable nurse vanished, replaced by something sharper, more focused. She moved through the prep sequence with mechanical precision. IV lines ready. Intubation kit standing by. Blood typed and waiting. Her hands never hesitated, never fumbled. Private First Class Drew Anderson arrived on a backboard, his face gray with shock and pain. The kid looked even younger than 19. Baby-faced, red hair, freckles standing out stark against his pale skin. His eyes darted around the trauma bay, wide with fear. "Drew, I'm Dr. Stratton. You're at Naval Hospital Camp Pendleton. We're going to take care of you." Emily's voice carried calm authority as she positioned herself at his head. "Can you feel your legs?" I don't know, I can't. Everything hurts." "That's okay, we're gonna figure it out. Allison, get me a full spinal series. I need BP and oxygen saturation now." The team moved like a choreographed dance. Emily's hands assessed the injury with gentle efficiency. Second and third lumbar vertebrae. The angle of impact suggested significant force. She palpated his abdomen carefully. Rigid. Guarding. Internal bleeding almost certain. BP dropping, 90/60. Allison called out. "He's bleeding internally. We need to get him to surgery now." Emily looked up at Hospital Corpsman Third Class Brian Foster, who had just entered. "Get me Lieutenant Commander Hayes. Tell her we have a splenic rupture, possible liver involvement. This kid doesn't have time for a full workup." "On it." Brian disappeared. Emily worked quickly, establishing 2 large-bore IVs, starting fluids and blood products. Drew's hand reached out, grabbed her sleeve with surprising strength. "Am I going to die?" His voice cracked on the question. Emily met his eyes. "Honest, but not cruel. Not if I can help it, but I need you to fight with me." "Can you do that?" He nodded weakly. The trauma bay doors burst open. Staff Sergeant Lance Whitaker entered with the confidence of someone who owned every room he walked into. 34 years old, 6'2", built like he spent every free hour in the gym. His jaw was square, his eyes cold blue, his uniform immaculate, despite the early hour. 2 other Marines followed him, Corporal Wade Griffin and Sergeant Dale Carpenter, both looking uncomfortable. "What's his status?" Whitaker demanded, not bothering with introductions or courtesy. Emily didn't look up from inserting the second IV. "Critical, internal bleeding. He needs surgery immediately." "Can he talk? I need his statement about what happened." "He needs surgery, not an interrogation." Emily's voice remained level, professional. "You can talk to him after we've saved his life." Whitaker's expression darkened. "I'm his training officer. I have a right to know what mistakes he made that led to this injury." Something in his phrasing caught Emily's attention. Not what happened, but what mistakes he made. Preemptive blame assignment. She'd heard that tone before, usually from people trying to cover their own errors. Right now, the only thing that matters is stabilizing him. Emily finally looked up, met Whitaker's glare without flinching. "If you want to help, you can wait outside and let us work." For a moment, tension crystallized in the space between them. Whitaker wasn't accustomed to civilians telling him what to do, especially not women, especially not in front of his subordinates. His jaw clenched, his hands flexed. Lieutenant Commander Sandra Hayes entered, breaking the moment. She was 48, gray streaks in her dark hair, a Navy surgeon with 22 years of experience, and zero tolerance for interference in her trauma bay. "What do we have, Dr. Stratton?" Emily rattled off the assessment. 19-year-old male fall from height during rappelling exercise. Suspected L2-L3 vertebral fracture. Splenic rupture with active internal bleeding. BP dropping despite fluid resuscitation. He needs the OR now. Hayes did her own rapid assessment, nodded once. "Agreed, get him prepped. Brian, call the OR and tell them we're coming up." She glanced at Whitaker and his Marines. "Gentlemen, you need to clear out, now. I need to know what he said about the accident." Whitaker didn't move. "He said he's in pain and scared. That's all that matters right now." Hayes stepped between Whitaker and the gurney. "You can file your report later. Get out of my trauma bay." Whitaker held his ground for 3 more seconds, a petty assertion of authority, then turned on his heel and left. Wade and Dale followed, both looking relieved to escape. The surgery took 4 hours. Emily wasn't in the operating room. That was beyond her scope. But she monitored from the surgical prep area, watching the vitals, tracking the blood products being used. Drew Anderson was lucky. The spleen was damaged but salvageable. The liver had only minor lacerations. The vertebral fracture was stable. No spinal cord involvement. He would recover. But during those 4 hours, Emily made some calls. Quiet inquiries through channels that didn't officially exist. She contacted Corporal Vincent Perry, a Marine she'd treated 3 months ago for a knee injury. Perry was young, idealistic, the type who still believed the Corps should live up to its stated values. He also happened to be assigned to the same training company as Drew Anderson. "Perry, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. The rappelling accident this morning? What actually happened?" There was a long pause on the phone. "Ma'am, I don't think I should. A kid almost died. If there was equipment failure or negligence, it needs to be documented. Not to get anyone in trouble, but to prevent it from happening again." Another pause. Then, quietly, "The rigging wasn't checked properly. Staff Sergeant Whitaker was supposed to do the safety inspection, but he was late to the exercise. Told us to just get started. Said we all knew what we were doing. Drew was the first one over the edge. The anchor point wasn't secured right when his weight hit it." Emily's grip tightened on the phone. "Did anyone else witness this?" "At least 15 guys. But, ma'am, Whitaker's already telling everyone that Drew screwed up his own rigging, that he was careless and didn't follow procedure. It's going to be the official story. Would you be willing to give a statement about what you actually saw?" The longest pause yet. Perry's career hung in the balance of his answer. I don't know, going against a staff sergeant, that's not something you just do." "I understand. Thank you for telling me the truth." Emily ended the call. She had suspected as much. Whitaker had the look of a man who prioritized his record over his responsibilities, the kind of leader who saw subordinates as stepping stones or obstacles, never as human beings deserving protection, the kind who would let a kid take the blame for his own negligence. Emily had known men like Whitaker before, in places where mistakes cost more than just careers. By noon, Drew Anderson was in recovery, stable, his parents notified, and on their way from Nevada. Emily wrote up her medical report with meticulous detail. The nature of the injuries, the mechanism of trauma, the emergency interventions required. Everything factual, everything documented. She made no mention of Whitaker's attempt to question a critically injured patient. That was unprofessional but not technically illegal. She made no mention of Perry's information about the rigging failure. That wasn't her place to report, not yet. But she filed the report with timestamps, with witness names, with every detail that might matter later. Because Emily Stratton had learned long ago that documentation was armor, that truth preserved in writing could survive longer than truth spoken aloud. At 11:45, she headed to the hospital cafeteria. The massive space served both medical staff and Marines from the base. 300 people could fit in the dining area, and during lunch hour it usually reached capacity. Long tables arranged in rows, industrial kitchens serving hot meals, the constant noise of conversations and clattering trays. Emily grabbed a simple lunch: grilled chicken, rice, steamed vegetables. She wasn't particularly hungry, but she'd learned to eat on schedule regardless of appetite. Fuel was fuel. She looked for an empty table near the back, somewhere quiet where she could review patient charts on her tablet. She never made it to that table. Well, if it isn't the nurse who thinks she's a doctor. Whitaker's voice carried across the cafeteria. Conversations didn't stop, but they quieted. People sensed entertainment approaching, or trouble, often the same thing in military environments. Emily turned. Whitaker stood with Tyler Jenkins and Wade Griffin flanking him. 3 Marines, all bigger than her, all positioned to make her feel small. It was deliberate. Everything about Whitaker was deliberate. "Staff Sergeant," Emily kept her voice neutral. "Can I help you?" "You can start by explaining why you wrote in your medical report that Private Anderson's injuries were consistent with equipment failure or negligence." He held up his phone, displaying what looked like a copy of her report. "That's making serious accusations." "I wrote that his injuries were consistent with a fall from height due to anchor point failure. That's a factual medical assessment based on the injury pattern and the circumstances reported to me." Emily kept her tray steady. "If you have concerns about the medical documentation, you should speak with Lieutenant Commander Hayes." "I'm speaking with you." Whitaker stepped closer. "You're a civilian contractor. You work here on our sufferance, and you're going to amend that report to remove any suggestion of equipment failure." The cafeteria had gone quieter now, more people watching. This was becoming a show. "I can't amend a medical report to remove factual observations. That would be falsifying documentation." Emily's voice remained calm. "If you believe my assessment is incorrect, you can request an independent review." "I'm not requesting anything." Whitaker's voice hardened. "I'm telling you to fix your mistake, or I'll make sure everyone knows about all the other mistakes you've been making." There it was, the threat, not even veiled. Emily set her tray down on the nearest table. She turned to face Whitaker fully, her posture open, non-confrontational, but refusing to back down. "What mistakes would those be? How about the fact that you delayed Anderson's surgery by insisting on running unnecessary tests? How about the fact that you contradicted the attending physician's orders? How about the fact that your hesitation almost cost that kid his life?" Every word was a lie. Emily knew it. Whitaker knew it. But the cafeteria didn't know it, and that was the point. Character assassination performed for an audience. "Those are serious allegations." Emily's voice stayed level. "Do you have any evidence to support them?" "I have the testimony of everyone who was in that trauma bay. I have the timeline showing how long it took to get Anderson into surgery. I have documentation of your insubordination." Whitaker smiled, cold and satisfied. "What I don't have is your apology. Yet, this was the moment. The fulcrum point. Emily could de-escalate, could promise to discuss this later through proper channels, could bow to the social pressure of 300 watching Marines. She could make this go away with a few words of appeasement. But that wasn't why she was here. "I'm not going to apologize for doing my job correctly." Emily's voice carried further than it had before, clear and deliberate. "Private Anderson is alive because the trauma team followed proper protocol. If you have concerns about how I practice medicine, file a formal complaint through the appropriate channels. Until then, I have nothing more to say to you." She reached for her tray. Whitaker grabbed her wrist. His grip was hard enough to leave marks, hard enough to make his intent clear. "You're gonna show me respect. Let go of me." Emily didn't pull away, didn't struggle, just a simple statement of boundary. Or what? You'll run crying to your supervisor? Whitaker twisted her wrist slightly, forcing her to turn toward him. You're nothing here. A civilian playing dress-up in a military world. You don't get to disrespect a staff sergeant and walk away. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you're enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. In the crowd, Corporal Ryan Mitchell sat frozen at his table, his lunch forgotten. He was 24 years old, 3 years in the Corps, and he'd never seen anything like this. Officers and senior enlisted didn't physically grab medical staff. They didn't threaten civilians in front of hundreds of witnesses. This was wrong, obviously, clearly wrong. But Ryan said nothing. His table companion said nothing. The female Marine sitting 2 tables over, Corporal Lindsay Warren, looked appalled but didn't move. Across the cafeteria, First Sergeant Howard Blake watched with narrowed eyes, his expression unreadable. I'm asking you once more to let go of my wrist. Emily's voice remained unnaturally calm. This is assault, and you're doing it in front of 300 witnesses. Assault? Whitaker laughed, a harsh bark. You want to see assault? What happened next occurred in less than 2 seconds, but for everyone watching, it unfolded with horrible clarity. Whitaker released her wrist and shoved her backward. Emily stumbled, caught herself against the table edge. Whitaker followed, closing the distance. His hand came up, not quite a fist, more of an open palm strike, but his anger had overridden his control. The blow caught Emily across the left side of her face, spinning her head sideways. The impact sounded like a thunderclap in the suddenly silent cafeteria. Emily's ponytail whipped around from the momentum. She staggered backward into the serving counter, her hand coming up instinctively to her jaw. Blood appeared at the corner of her mouth, a thin red line tracking down her chin. 300 Marines stared in absolute shock. Whitaker stood over her, breathing hard, his face flushed with rage that he'd just unleashed in the worst possible way. For a moment, he seemed to realize what he'd done, seemed to understand that he'd just committed a career-ending act in front of hundreds of witnesses. Then, his training kicked in. Cover, deflect, justify. You saw that, he said loudly, addressing the cafeteria. She attacked me first. I was defending myself. Nobody had seen Emily attack anyone. 300 people had watched Whitaker grab her, shove her, and strike her. But Whitaker was counting on authority, on rank, on the instinct that makes people doubt what they saw when someone in power tells them it didn't happen. Emily straightened slowly. She touched her lip, looked at the blood on her fingers. When she spoke, her voice carried across the silent cafeteria with devastating clarity. For the record, I did not attack you. I did not threaten you. I attempted to walk away from this confrontation multiple times. You grabbed me, shoved me, and struck me in front of 300 witnesses. She looked around the room, making eye contact with random Marines. I hope some of you were recording this, because I'm filing assault charges. You're filing charges? Whitaker's voice rose. You're the one who's been compromising patient care, who's been overstepping your authority, who just assaulted a staff sergeant. I'm a trauma nurse with 8 years of experience. Private Anderson is alive because I did my job correctly. Emily's voice stayed calm despite the blood on her face. The only person who compromised anything is you, when you failed to properly inspect rappelling equipment and then tried to blame a 19-year-old for your negligence. The accusation hung in the air like a grenade. Whitaker's face went from flushed to pale. You don't know what you're talking about. I know exactly what I'm talking about. I know you were late to the training exercise. I know you skipped the safety inspection. I know at least 15 Marines witnessed you telling them to proceed without proper equipment checks. And I know you've been trying to cover it up by blaming Drew Anderson for your mistakes. The cafeteria had gone beyond silent. This was testimony. This was truth spoken in front of an audience that would remember every word. Whitaker's hands clenched into fists. You have no proof. I have a medical report documenting injury patterns consistent with anchor failure. I have the timeline showing you arrived late. And I have witnesses who will verify what actually happened, assuming you haven't intimidated them all into silence yet. It was that last sentence that pushed Whitaker over the edge, the suggestion that he was not just negligent, but actively corrupt, actively silencing witnesses. The implication that his authority was built on fear rather than respect. He lunged. Not a trained strike, just pure rage translated into motion. His fist came around in a wide arc, aimed at Emily's face again, no pretense of restraint or control. Emily moved. Not the fumbling dodge of someone unaccustomed to violence. Not the flinch of a civilian surprised by sudden aggression. She shifted her weight, angled her body, and Whitaker's fist passed through empty air where her head had been a fraction of a second before. The movement was small, economic, the kind of reaction that came from muscle memory drilled through thousands of hours of training. Several people in the cafeteria caught it, the way she'd moved. The way she'd read his attack and responded with precision timing. That wasn't luck, that wasn't coincidence. Whitaker's momentum carried him forward. He stumbled, off balance. Emily didn't counterattack, didn't press any advantage. She simply stepped aside and let him crash into the serving counter. He spun around, fury and humiliation mixing in his expression. "You're done. You're finished here. I'm going to make sure you never work in a military facility again." "Are you threatening me again?" Emily's voice carried a new edge now. "Because you just committed assault and battery in front of 300 witnesses, and now you're threatening retaliation against someone who stopped you from committing a second assault. Please, keep talking. Every word makes the court-martial easier." The mention of court-martial seemed to penetrate Whitaker's rage. His eyes darted around the cafeteria, seeing for the first time the sea of faces watching him. Some shocked, some disgusted, some carefully neutral, but all of them witnesses. Captain Sharon Bennett appeared in the cafeteria entrance. She was 41 years old, head of the medical department, and she looked at the scene before her with the expression of someone who just watched a nightmare unfold. Blood on Emily's face, Whitaker standing over her with clenched fists, 300 Marines frozen in their seats. What in God's name is happening here? Her voice cut through the tension like a blade through fog. Medical authority trumped military aggression, at least in a hospital setting. Whitaker straightened, tried to compose himself. "Captain Bennett, this civilian assaulted me and I was defending myself. I'm requesting that she be removed from the facility and charges be filed." "That's not what I saw." The voice came from the crowd. Corporal Ryan Mitchell stood up slowly, his face pale but his voice steady. Staff Sergeant Whitaker grabbed her first. He shoved her. He hit her. She never touched him except to try to get away. Silence crashed through the cafeteria again, a junior Marine contradicting a staff sergeant. That was career suicide under most circumstances. But Ryan wasn't alone. "I saw it too," Corporal Lindsay Warren stood. "He assaulted her. She was trying to de-escalate." "Same here." Private Jackson Whitley, barely 20 years old, rose from his seat. He grabbed her wrist, then he hit her. One by one, Marines began standing. Not all of them, not even half, but enough. 10, then 15, then 20 voices confirming what everyone had seen, but not everyone had the courage to say aloud. Whitaker looked around at the testimony mounting against him, and for the first time, real fear crossed his features. Captain Bennett pulled out her radio. "Security to the hospital cafeteria. We have a situation that requires immediate response. Also notify Base Commander Colonel Lawrence Bennett that we have an assault incident involving medical personnel." She walked over to Emily, gently touching her shoulder. "Dr. Stratton, let me see your face." Emily allowed the examination. The blow had split her lip and would leave bruising along her jaw, but nothing was broken. Captain Bennett had known Emily for 8 months, had worked alongside her, had seen her handle countless emergencies with quiet competence. She'd never seen her rattled, never seen her lose composure. She wasn't rattled now. Blood on her face, assault recorded in front of 300 witnesses, career potentially destroyed by a vindictive staff sergeant, and Emily Stratton stood there with the calm of someone who'd weathered much worse storms. "Are you all right?" Captain Bennett asked quietly. "I'm fine." Emily's voice was steady. "But I want to file formal charges against Staff Sergeant Whitaker for assault, battery, and witness intimidation. That's going to trigger a major investigation." "I know." Captain Bennett studied her for a long moment. "You understand this is going to get messy? He'll fight back. He'll make accusations. He'll try to destroy your credibility." Emily met her eyes. "He's welcome to try." Something in her tone made Captain Bennett pause. Not defiance, not bravado. Just certainty. The kind of certainty that came from knowing exactly how these situations unfolded and having no fear of the outcome. "All right," Captain Bennett nodded. "Let's get you to an exam room. I want your injuries documented properly. And then we're going to sit down with Colonel Bennett and figure out what happens next." As they walked toward the exit, Emily caught sight of Master Gunnery Sergeant Preston Burke standing near the back wall. He was 51 years old, 30 years in the Corps, a man who'd seen everything the military could throw at a person. He was watching her with an expression that was part curiosity, part concern, and part recognition. Their eyes met for just a moment. Burke's narrowed slightly, studying her the way someone might study a puzzle that didn't quite fit its box. Then Emily was through the doors and gone, leaving behind a cafeteria full of Marines trying to process what they'd just witnessed. Whitaker stood alone now, his supporters having quietly melted away. Tyler Jenkins and Wade Griffin had disappeared. The Marines who'd stood to testify against him remained on their feet, a silent wall of judgment. Chief Petty Officer Dennis Clark arrived with 2 security personnel. "Staff Sergeant Whitaker, you need to come with us." For a moment, it looked like Whitaker might resist. His hands flexed, his jaw clenched. But even through his rage and fear, he understood that fighting security would only make everything worse. He walked out flanked by guards, his career collapsing around him with every step. In the cafeteria, conversations erupted like dams breaking. 300 Marines processing what they'd seen, what it meant, what would happen next. The quiet civilian nurse who'd just taken a punch and then methodically destroyed her attacker's credibility without raising her voice or throwing a single blow in return. Corporal Ryan Mitchell sat back down, his hands shaking with adrenaline. He'd just ended his relationship with every Marine who valued loyalty to rank over loyalty to truth. But he'd done the right thing. He knew he'd done the right thing. Corporal Lindsay Warren walked over to his table. "That took guts." "It took stupidity," one of Ryan's table companions muttered. "Whitaker has friends. This isn't over." "Maybe not." Ryan's voice was quiet. "But at least I can look at myself in the mirror tomorrow." Across the cafeteria, First Sergeant Howard Blake finally spoke to the Marines at his table. "I've been in the Corps 26 years. I've seen a lot of things, but I've never seen a civilian take a hit like that and stay standing without crying or running. That woman's got steel in her spine." "Think she'll actually press charges?" someone asked. "If she's smart, she will. Otherwise, Whitaker will come after her the second this dies down." Blake stood, gathering his tray. "And I don't know about you, but I'm going to make sure I'm available to testify if it comes to that. What we saw today was assault, plain and simple. Rank doesn't excuse it." Master Gunnery Sergeant Preston Burke remained at his position near the back wall long after most Marines had filtered out. He pulled out his phone, scrolled through contacts, found a number he hadn't called in 3 years. The person answered on the second ring. "Burke, it's been a while. I need you to run a background check for me. Quiet, deep, not through official channels. This official Corps business or personal curiosity?" "Might be both." Burke watched the empty space where Emily had stood. "Name's Emily Stratton, civilian trauma nurse working at Naval Hospital Camp Pendleton. She's been here 8 months. What's the flag?" "She just took a punch from a staff sergeant and moved like someone with operator training. Dodged a follow-up strike with timing that doesn't come from self-defense classes. And she did it without thinking. Pure muscle memory." Burke paused. "I want to know who she really is. Could just be a coincidence. Some people have good reflexes." "Could be, but my gut says otherwise. Can you dig?" "Give me 48 hours. If there's something to find, I'll find it." "Thanks." Burke ended the call and finally left the cafeteria. Something didn't add up about Emily Stratton. Civilian nurses didn't move like that. They didn't stand their ground against aggressive staff sergeants without flinching. They didn't dismantle accusations with the precision of someone who'd testified under hostile interrogation before. She was hiding something. And Burke had survived 3 decades in the Marines by trusting his instincts about people who weren't what they appeared to be. In exam room 4, Emily sat on the paper-covered table while Captain Bennett cleaned the blood from her face. The split lip was minor, would heal in a few days. The bruising would be spectacular by tomorrow, purple and yellow spreading across her jaw, but nothing that required serious medical intervention. "You handled that remarkably well," Captain Bennett said quietly. "Most people would have been crying or in shock after being hit like that." "I've had worse days." Emily's voice was neutral. "Have you?" Captain Bennett studied her. "Because I'm starting to think there's more to your story than your resume suggests." Emily met her eyes, but said nothing. "I've been in military medicine for 19 years. I've worked with a lot of nurses, a lot of contractors. You're different. The way you work, the way you think, the way you handled yourself in that cafeteria." Captain Bennett set down the antiseptic wipe. "Who are you really, Emily Stratton?" For a long moment, Emily was silent. Then she smiled, just slightly, despite the split lip. "Right now, I'm a trauma nurse filing assault charges against a staff sergeant who made a very stupid mistake. That's all that matters." "Is it?" "It's all that matters for today." Captain Bennett nodded slowly. She didn't push. Whatever secrets Emily Stratton was carrying, they'd surface in their own time. "All right, I'm documenting your injuries, photographing the bruising, getting statements from witnesses. By this time tomorrow, Colonel Bennett will want to speak with you about pressing charges." "I'll be ready." "I'm sure you will be." Captain Bennett helped her down from the exam table. "Take the rest of the day off. Go home, ice that jaw, and try to decompress. Today was traumatic even if you're handling it well. I appreciate the concern, but I'd rather stay and finish my shift. Private Anderson will be waking up from anesthesia soon. I'd like to check on him." "Emily—" "I'm fine, Captain, really." Emily's voice carried quiet conviction. Staying busy is better than going home and thinking too much. Captain Bennett recognized that logic. Recognized the mindset of someone who'd learned to compartmentalize trauma and keep functioning. She'd seen it in combat veterans, in people who'd survived things that would break most humans. "All right, but if you need anything at all, you come find me. Understood?" "Understood." Emily left the exam room and walked through the quiet corridors of Building 3. It was 13:30 now, the afternoon settling into routine rhythms. Nurses making rounds. Doctors reviewing charts. The hospital continuing its mission of healing, regardless of the drama that had just unfolded. She stopped at the recovery room where Drew Anderson was slowly waking up. His parents hadn't arrived yet. He was alone, groggy, confused. His eyes found Emily and focused with effort. "Hey, Doc, did I make it?" Emily pulled up a chair beside his bed, careful to keep her bruised jaw turned away from his line of sight. "You made it. Surgery went well. Your spleen is repaired, your spine is stable, you're going to recover fully." Relief flooded his young face. "Thank God. When I was falling, I thought I was dead. The equipment failed. The anchor point wasn't secured properly. It wasn't your fault. Staff Sergeant Whitaker said I rigged it wrong, said I didn't follow procedure. Staff Sergeant Whitaker was lying to cover his own negligence." Emily's voice was gentle but firm. "You did nothing wrong. The investigation will prove that." "There's going to be an investigation?" "There's going to be several investigations." Emily managed a small smile. "Don't worry about it. Just focus on healing. Your parents are on their way." Drew's eyes were already closing again, the anesthesia pulling him back under. "Thanks, Doc, for saving me. That's what I'm here for." Emily sat with him until his breathing evened out into sleep. Then she stood and walked to the window, looking out over Camp Pendleton's sprawling grounds. Thousands of Marines training for war. Hundreds of medical personnel supporting them. A massive machine designed to create warriors and keep them alive long enough to fight. And somewhere in that machine, corruption had taken root. Medical supplies disappearing, equipment failures being covered up. Young Marines being sacrificed to protect the careers of people who'd forgotten what service actually meant. Emily had been investigating for 8 months. Quietly, carefully, building evidence that couldn't be dismissed or destroyed. She'd come here with a mission, and that mission hadn't included getting punched by a staff sergeant in front of 300 witnesses. But sometimes plans changed. Sometimes opportunities presented themselves in unexpected ways. Lance Whitaker had just made the biggest mistake of his life. He'd assaulted her in public, created hundreds of witnesses, forced an official investigation that would shine light into corners he desperately wanted to keep dark. And Emily was going to use that investigation to expose everything. She touched her bruised jaw, felt the dull throb of pain, and allowed herself a grim satisfaction. 8 months of waiting. 8 months of being underestimated, dismissed, ignored. 8 months of watching corruption flourish while she gathered evidence. It was almost over now. The endgame was beginning. Behind her, someone knocked on the doorframe. Emily turned to find Master Gunnery Sergeant Preston Burke standing in the doorway, his expression unreadable. "Dr. Stratton, got a minute?" Emily studied him for a moment. Burke was known throughout Camp Pendleton as someone who saw too much and said too little. A man who'd survived 3 decades by being smarter than his enemies and more loyal than his friends. If he was here, it wasn't for small talk. "Of course, Master Gunnery Sergeant, what can I do for you?" Burke stepped into the room, closed the door behind him with deliberate care. "You can start by telling me why a civilian trauma nurse moves like someone with operator training." Emily's expression didn't change. "I don't know what you mean." "Yes, you do." Burke's voice was quiet, not threatening, just observant. "I've trained enough Marines to recognize muscle memory when I see it. The way you dodged Whitaker's second punch wasn't self-defense class training. That was combat reflex, the kind that comes from serious operational background. I took some self-defense courses in college, stayed active. Self-defense courses don't teach you to read an attack and respond with that kind of timing. You moved before he finished committing to the strike. That's predictive response. That's high-level training." Burke crossed his arms. "So I'm going to ask you again. Who are you really?" Emily held his gaze. "I'm exactly who my credentials say I am, a trauma nurse with 8 years of experience working in military medicine. Maybe you're something else, and being a nurse is just your cover." Burke tilted his head slightly. "Here's what I think. I think you're here investigating something. I think you've been undercover for months. And I think Staff Sergeant Whitaker just accelerated whatever operation you're running by forcing you into the spotlight." The accuracy of his assessment was remarkable and dangerous. Emily kept her face neutral. "That's quite a theory, Master Gunnery Sergeant. Do you have any evidence to support it?" "Just 30 years of reading people." Burke's expression softened fractionally. "I'm not trying to expose you, Dr. Stratton. I'm trying to understand the situation. Because if you're really here investigating corruption, and if Whitaker's assault was because you were getting too close to something he wants hidden, then you're in more danger than you might realize. I appreciate your concern, but I can take care of myself." "I saw. You handled yourself well today." Burke paused. "But here's the thing. If Whitaker was dirty enough to hit you in front of 300 witnesses, he's dirty enough to do worse when there are no witnesses. And if he's connected to something larger, you might have just painted a target on yourself." Emily was quiet for a moment, evaluating. Burke was perceptive, loyal, and according to every piece of information she'd gathered over the past 8 months, incorruptible. He might be an asset, or he might be a complication. "If there was an investigation happening," she said carefully, "and if I was somehow involved in it, what would you do with that information?" Burke smiled grimly. "Depends on what's being investigated. If it's something that threatens Marines or compromises operational integrity, I'd want to help. If it's minor bureaucratic nonsense, I'd mind my own business. And if it was something serious, medical supply theft, equipment tampering, systematic corruption that's putting young Marines at risk?" The smile vanished. Burke's expression hardened into something cold and dangerous. "Then I'd want to help. And I'd want names." Emily studied him for 5 more seconds, weighing risks and benefits, calculating probabilities. Then she made a decision. "Not here, not now, but if you're serious about helping, meet me at 0700 tomorrow in the base chapel. Come alone, tell no one." Burke nodded once. "I'll be there." He left without another word. Emily returned to the window, watching him walk across the parking lot toward Building 7. She'd just taken a significant risk. Bringing someone else into the investigation changed everything, but she'd also just gained a powerful ally. Someone with 3 decades of institutional knowledge and the kind of credibility that could make or break a case. The pieces were moving faster now. Whitaker's assault had forced everything into the open. The investigation she'd been building quietly for 8 months was about to become very public, very loud, and very dangerous. Emily touched her bruised jaw again, feeling the pain that would serve as evidence, as testimony, as proof that she'd been willing to take the hit to expose the truth. 8 months of patience. 8 months of pretending to be less than she was. 8 months of watching corruption flourish while she documented every detail. It was almost over. The reveal was coming. And when it arrived, nothing on Camp Pendleton would ever be the same. Outside the recovery room, hospital life continued. Nurses made rounds. Doctors reviewed treatment plans. The afternoon shifted toward evening with the steady rhythm of institutional routine. But beneath that routine, fault lines were spreading. Whitaker under investigation. Witnesses coming forward. Burke asking questions. Captain Bennett documenting evidence. The quiet civilian nurse with the unremarkable face and brown ponytail had just become the most dangerous person on the entire base. And nobody except Emily knew the half of it yet. The base chapel sat on the eastern edge of Camp Pendleton, a modest building constructed in the 1960s with white painted wood and a simple cross above the entrance. At 0700, the morning sun cast long shadows across the empty parking lot. Master Gunnery Sergeant Preston Burke arrived first, his truck the only vehicle present. He told his wife he had an early meeting, which wasn't technically a lie, just incomplete truth. Emily appeared 3 minutes later, walking from the direction of the bus stop. She wore civilian clothes, jeans and a gray sweater, her brown hair still pulled back in that practical ponytail. The bruising on her jaw had bloomed overnight into spectacular shades of purple and yellow, visible even from a distance. Burke held the chapel door open. Neither spoke until they were inside, the heavy door closing behind them with a solid thunk that emphasized their isolation. The interior smelled of old wood and furniture polish. Rows of simple pews faced a modest altar. Morning light filtered through plain glass windows, creating geometric patterns on the worn carpet. Emily chose a pew halfway back, positioning herself where she could see both entrances. Burke sat beside her, maintaining respectful distance. "Thank you for trusting me. I haven't decided if I trust you yet." Emily's voice was calm, matter of fact, "but I'm willing to hear you out." "Fair enough." Burke leaned back against the pew. "I made some calls last night, quiet inquiries through people who owe me favors. Your service record is sealed tighter than anything I've seen outside of classified Spec Ops personnel. That alone tells me you're not just a nurse." Emily said nothing, waiting. "Here's what I know. Emily Stratton exists. She has nursing credentials from Georgetown University, 8 years of trauma experience, excellent references. Everything checks out perfectly." Burke paused. Too perfectly. Like someone built a cover identity with exceptional attention to detail. Or maybe I'm just good at my job and keep my paperwork organized. Maybe. Burke pulled out his phone, scrolled to a message, held it up for her to see. "But then I got this response an hour ago. My contact works in personnel records at Quantico. He said your name flagged an alert in a restricted database. He couldn't access the file, but he could see that it exists, and that it's classified at a level he's never encountered for civilian medical personnel." Emily studied the message on his screen. The existence of that alert meant her cover was thinner than she'd hoped. Eventually, someone with the right clearances would put the pieces together. Burke had just accelerated that timeline. "What do you want from me?" she asked quietly. "The truth about what you're investigating, and how I can help." Emily was silent for a long moment, weighing options. Burke had already proven he could dig deeper than most. He had connections, credibility, and most importantly, he'd come alone as instructed. That suggested integrity, or at least sufficient caution. Lieutenant Colonel Norman Ashford runs medical supply logistics for this facility and 3 others in the region. Emily's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. Over the past 14 months, approximately $2.3 million worth of critical combat medical supplies have gone missing. Hemostatic agents, advanced trauma kits, morphine auto-injectors, tourniquets, chest seals, equipment that saves lives in combat. Burke's expression darkened. "How much has gone missing?" "Enough to fully stock 60 combat medic bags, enough to treat hundreds of casualties. And it's being sold on the black market to private military contractors, foreign buyers, and organized crime networks." Emily pulled out her own phone, showed him a spreadsheet. "I've been tracking the discrepancies for 8 months. Every shipment that arrives short. Every requisition that gets fulfilled with substandard replacements. Every inventory audit that gets manipulated to hide the theft." Burke studied the numbers, his jaw tightening with each line. "Ashford's running this?" "Ashford's coordinating it. But he's not working alone." Emily scrolled to another document. "Staff Sergeant Lance Whitaker has been part of the operation for at least 6 months. He facilitates the physical removal of supplies, uses his training responsibilities as cover to access storage facilities. Yesterday's equipment failure wasn't an accident. The rappelling gear that failed was scheduled for replacement last month, but the new equipment was diverted and sold. They substituted the old gear back into rotation and falsified the maintenance records. Jesus Christ, Burke's voice was barely audible. Drew Anderson almost died because they stole the equipment that should have kept him safe. He's not the only one. 3 months ago, Corporal Derek Hudson suffered complications during a training injury because the trauma kit used to treat him had expired supplies. The unit should have been replaced, but the replacements were stolen. Hudson survived, but barely. Emily's voice carried controlled anger. This isn't just theft. It's negligence that borders on manslaughter. Burke stood, paced to the altar and back, his hands clenched. 30 years of service. 3 decades of believing the Corps stood for something greater than individual ambition. And now this. Medical supplies stolen. Marines endangered. The system he'd devoted his life to corrupted from within. How deep does this go? Who else is involved? I've identified at least 7 people in the network. Ashford and Whitaker are the primary operators. Corporal Todd Hansen works in supply administration. He falsifies the inventory records. Lieutenant Derek Shaw provides access to secure storage areas. Chief Petty Officer Dennis Clark runs interference with security protocols. Emily paused. And there are 3 others I haven't fully identified yet, higher ranking, possibly providing political protection. Why haven't you gone to the authorities? Why the undercover investigation? Because the first time this theft ring was reported 2 years ago, the investigation got shut down within a week. Evidence disappeared. Witnesses recanted. The Marine who made the initial report got transferred to Okinawa, and his career stalled completely. Emily met Burke's eyes. Someone with significant authority protected them. I needed to build an airtight case before going public. Something so comprehensive that it couldn't be buried. And then Whitaker assaulted you and forced everything into the open. He got sloppy, desperate. I've been asking questions about the equipment failure that injured Drew Anderson. Getting too close to documentation that would expose the pattern. Emily touched her bruised jaw. He thought he could intimidate me into silence. Instead, he just provided the catalyst for a formal investigation that will uncover everything. Burke returned to the pew, sat heavily. You said your cover identity flagged alerts in classified databases. What's your real background? Emily hesitated. This was the line. Once crossed, there was no walking back. I'm not just a nurse. I spent 7 years as a force reconnaissance corpsman. 2 deployments to Afghanistan, 1 to Iraq. I earned the Medal of Honor for actions in Helmand Province 4 years ago. Her voice remained steady, clinical. 23 Marines were pinned down by enemy fire. I kept them alive for 11 hours under continuous assault until extraction arrived. 3 of them shouldn't have survived their injuries, but they did because I had the right equipment and the training to use it. Burke's eyes widened. He'd heard about Helmand Province. Every senior Marine had heard about that action. The corpsman who'd held the defensive position alone while treating casualties. The story said the corpsman had died 3 months later in an unrelated incident. The official story says you're dead. The official story serves the investigation. After Helmand, I was recruited for a different kind of service, investigating corruption within military medical systems. Finding the people who steal the equipment that saves lives. Emily's voice hardened. I went undercover because someone has to stop them. Someone has to make sure that when the next corpsman reaches for a hemostatic agent or a tourniquet, it's actually there. The chapel was silent except for the distant sound of morning colors being played across the base. Burke processed everything he'd just learned, recalibrating his entire understanding of the woman sitting beside him. What do you need from me? Witness protection for the Marines who testified yesterday. Whitaker has friends, and they're going to go after anyone who spoke against him. Ryan Mitchell, Lindsay Warren, Jackson Whitley, and the others. They need someone watching their backs. Done. I'll make sure they're reassigned to details where Whitaker's people can't reach them. Burke pulled out a notepad. What else? Access to equipment maintenance records going back 18 months. Specifically, records for rappelling gear, trauma kits, and medical supplies used in training exercises. I need originals, not digital copies that can be altered. I can get those. Anything else? Yes. Emily's expression turned grim. Watch Lieutenant Colonel Ashford. He's going to start covering his tracks now that Whitaker's been exposed. Documents will disappear. Computer files will be corrupted. We need to preserve evidence before he can destroy it. I'll put surveillance on him, unofficial, off the books. If he moves, I'll know about it. Burke stood. And Emily, for what it's worth, thank you. For your service. For what you did in Helmand. For what you're doing now. I'm just finishing what I started. Those 23 Marines survived because the equipment worked. Because the supplies were there when I needed them. No one should die because someone decided to steal their second chance. She rose as well. I need to get to my shift. We should avoid being seen together until this investigation concludes. Agreed. I'll contact you through secure channels only. Burke hesitated. Be careful. If they figured out you're getting close enough to threaten them, they won't stop at assault. These people have already demonstrated they're willing to let Marines die for profit. I know, but I'm harder to kill than they think. They left the chapel separately, Burke first, Emily waiting 5 minutes before following. The morning had fully arrived, the base coming alive with the controlled chaos of thousands of Marines beginning their daily routines. Across the base, in Building 7's administrative wing, Lieutenant Colonel Norman Ashford sat in his office reviewing overnight reports. He was 49 years old, 26 years of service, an administrator who'd risen through competence and careful networking. His office was immaculate, every surface organized, every file precisely labeled, the kind of order that suggested either extreme efficiency or obsessive control. His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Whitaker compromised. Civilian nurse investigating, need immediate damage control. Ashford stared at the message, his mind racing through contingencies. Whitaker was supposed to be reliable, supposed to handle problems quietly. Instead, he'd assaulted a witness in front of 300 Marines and triggered exactly the kind of attention they'd spent 2 years avoiding. He deleted the message, pulled out a different phone from his locked desk drawer, dialed a number from memory. "We have a problem," he said when the call connected. "The situation with Whitaker has escalated beyond containment. We need to implement Protocol 7. The voice on the other end was calm, measured. "Are you certain? Protocol 7 is permanent." "I'm certain. The nurse has been digging into equipment failures. She's connecting patterns. If she continues, she'll expose the entire operation. Then handle it. Clean. No connections back to us." "Understood." Ashford ended the call, returned the burner phone to its hidden compartment. Protocol 7 meant eliminating the problem through methods that would appear accidental. A training mishap. A vehicle collision. A medication error. Something that would raise no suspicions and close the investigation before it truly began. He'd never ordered someone's death before. The thought should have troubled him more than it did. In the trauma ward, Emily began her shift with the routine efficiency that had defined her 8 months on base. Checking supplies, reviewing patient charts, coordinating with Allison Gray about the day's schedule. Corporal Derek Hudson was being discharged after his complications 3 months ago had finally resolved. Private Drew Anderson remained in recovery, but was progressing well. Captain Sharon Bennett called Emily into her office at 0830. "We need to discuss yesterday's incident and what happens next." Emily sat across from the captain, her bruised jaw a visible reminder of the confrontation. "I'm prepared to provide a formal statement and testify if necessary." "That's good, because Colonel Lawrence Bennett wants to speak with you this afternoon. 2 o'clock in his office." Captain Bennett leaned forward. "Emily, I need to be honest with you. Pressing charges against a staff sergeant is going to make you enemies. People who value unit cohesion over individual justice. People who think you should have handled this quietly. I understand. Do you? Because this isn't just about assault. This is about challenging a system that often protects its own at the expense of outsiders." Captain Bennett's voice softened. "I support you completely, but I want you to know what you're walking into. I appreciate the warning, but I'm not backing down." Emily's tone carried quiet resolve. "Whitaker assaulted me because I was asking questions about equipment failures. If we let him get away with that, we're saying it's acceptable to silence people through violence. I can't accept that." "Neither can I. Captain Bennett nodded firmly. "All right, 2 o'clock, Colonel Bennett's office. I'll be there with you." Emily spent the rest of the morning managing patient care, but her mind tracked multiple threads simultaneously. Burke's investigation into witness protection, Ashford's inevitable response to Whitaker's exposure, the meeting with Colonel Bennett that would determine whether her assault charges move forward. At 11:45, she deliberately avoided the cafeteria. The scene of yesterday's confrontation would be filled with curious stares and whispered conversations. Instead, she ate a protein bar in the medical staff lounge, reviewing patient files on her tablet. Hospital Corpsman Second Class Allison Gray found her there. "Hey, Doc. How are you holding up?" "I'm fine. Jaw sore but functional." "That's not what I meant." Allison sat down across from her. "You got assaulted yesterday by a staff sergeant. That's traumatic. It's okay to not be fine." Emily looked up from her tablet, studied Allison's concerned expression. The younger woman had worked alongside her for 8 months, had seen her handle countless emergencies, but had never really known her. Nobody on this base really knew her. "I appreciate your concern. Honestly, I've been through worse." "Worse than being punched in front of 300 people?" "Yes." The simple certainty of Emily's answer made Allison pause. "You don't talk much about your past." "Not much to tell. I went to nursing school, worked various trauma centers, ended up here." The practice cover story, deployed so many times it felt almost true. "What about you? What brought you to military medicine?" The deflection worked. Allison launched into her own story. Family tradition of service, wanting to make a difference, the challenges and rewards of working in a military environment. Emily listened with apparent attention while her mind continued tracking the larger patterns. At 1400, she presented herself at Colonel Lawrence Bennett's office. The base commander's domain occupied the top floor of the administration building, with windows overlooking the sprawling complex of Camp Pendleton. Captain Sharon Bennett was already present, along with another officer Emily didn't recognize. Colonel Bennett stood as she entered. He was 56 years old, gray-haired, with the weathered face of someone who'd spent decades in demanding environments. His uniform displayed enough commendations to indicate serious service, but his eyes carried the weariness of someone who'd seen too many good systems corrupted by bad people. "Dr. Stratton, thank you for coming. This is Captain Robert Dalton from the Judge Advocate General's office. He'll be handling the legal aspects of your assault complaint." Dalton was younger, maybe 40, with sharp eyes and a precisely trimmed appearance. He shook Emily's hand with professional courtesy. "Dr. Stratton, I've reviewed the incident reports and witness statements. Before we proceed, I need to ask if you're certain you want to pursue formal charges. This will trigger a court-martial process that could take months and will subject you to intense scrutiny." "I'm certain." Emily's voice was steady. "Even knowing that Staff Sergeant Whitaker will likely mount a vigorous defense, that he'll attempt to discredit you, question your competence, and make this process as difficult as possible?" "Even knowing that." Dalton nodded, satisfied with her resolve. "Good. Then let's discuss what happens next." For the next 40 minutes, they reviewed the process. Witness statements being collected. Video evidence from security cameras and personal phones being analyzed. Medical documentation of Emily's injuries. The timeline of events leading up to the assault. Colonel Bennett listened carefully, occasionally asking clarifying questions. When the legal discussion concluded, he dismissed Dalton and Captain Bennett, asking Emily to remain. Off-the-record conversation, he said once they were alone. "You understand what that means?" "Yes, sir." "Good." Colonel Bennett moved to his window, looking out over the base. "I've been commanding this installation for 3 years. In that time, I've seen problems. Discipline issues, training accidents, the usual challenges of managing thousands of young warriors. But lately, something's felt wrong, off, like there's rot somewhere in the foundation." Emily remained silent, waiting. Yesterday's incident with Whitaker, the equipment failure that injured Private Anderson, missing inventory reports that never quite add up, medical supplies that seem to evaporate between requisition and delivery. He turned to face her. "You've been here 8 months. You're observant, you're competent, and unless I'm very mistaken, you're more than just a trauma nurse." The direct challenge hung in the air between them. Emily could maintain her cover, deflect with the usual responses, keep the investigation compartmentalized. Or she could trust the base commander with at least part of the truth. What makes you think I'm more than I appear, sir? Because trauma nurses don't usually move like trained operators. They don't dodge follow-up attacks with that kind of precision timing, and they don't remain that composed after being assaulted. Colonel Bennett's expression was unreadable. I checked your personnel file. Everything's in order. Perfect, actually. Too perfect. Like someone with exceptional resources built you a cover identity. Emily made a decision. If I were investigating corruption on this base, would you interfere with that investigation? That depends. Is the investigation sanctioned by proper authority? The highest authority, but it's classified beyond your clearance level. Colonel Bennett absorbed this. And Whitaker's assault, was that related to your investigation? He got nervous when I started asking questions about equipment failures. Thought he could intimidate me into silence. Instead, he gave you grounds for a formal investigation that will expose everything he's trying to hide. A thin smile crossed Colonel Bennett's face. Poetic justice, what do you need from me? Time, protection for the witnesses who testified, and a blind eye while I finish building the case. You have all three, but Dr. Stratton, understand this. If your investigation uncovers corruption at senior levels, I expect you to bring me that information immediately. I won't have criminals wearing my uniform, regardless of their rank or connections. Understood, sir. Dismissed. Emily left his office with the satisfaction of knowing she'd gained another powerful ally. Colonel Bennett might not know the full scope of her mission, but he'd given her exactly what she needed: institutional support and the freedom to continue working. She returned to the trauma ward and found Master Gunnery Sergeant Preston Burke waiting near the nurses' station, his expression grim. We need to talk. Privately. They moved to an empty equipment storage room. Burke closed the door, checked to ensure they were truly alone. I pulled those maintenance records you requested, found something disturbing. He handed her a folder. The repelling equipment that failed yesterday? It was scheduled for replacement 6 weeks ago. New gear was requisitioned, signed for, and supposedly installed. But the actual gear used was the old equipment, 14 months past its certification date. Emily flipped through the documents. Requisition forms, receiving signatures, installation verification, all perfectly documented, all completely false. Someone substituted the old gear back into rotation after the new equipment arrived. They sold the new gear and kept using the expired equipment, knowing it was dangerous. That's attempted murder. Burke's voice was low and angry. They knew that gear would fail. They just didn't care when or who got hurt. It's worse than that. Look at the receiving signature on the new equipment. Emily pointed to a scrawled name on the form. Lieutenant Derek Shaw. He signed for gear that never actually got installed. Which means he's not just facilitating the theft, he's actively participating in the cover-up. Shaw's been at Camp Pendleton for 2 years. Good service record, no disciplinary issues. He seems solid. Everyone seems solid until you look close enough to see the cracks. Emily photographed the documents with her phone. I need to secure these originals somewhere. Ashford and his network can't access them. Do you have a personal safe? I do. Off base. At my house. My wife doesn't even know the combination. Perfect. Take these originals there tonight. Make copies for my files first. Emily's mind was already planning next steps. We're close, Burke. Once we have Shaw's connection documented, we can start connecting him to Ashford, and from Ashford to whoever's protecting this operation from the top. How long until you have enough evidence to shut this down? Days, maybe a week. It depends on how quickly they move to cover their tracks now that Whitaker's exposed. Burke nodded slowly. Emily, I need to tell you something. I asked around about you this morning, very quietly, through channels that won't raise flags. One of my contacts said there's been unusual interest in your personnel file over the past 12 hours. Someone higher up is digging into your background. How high? Higher than base command, possibly Pentagon level. Emily absorbed this information. Her cover had always been temporary, designed to last long enough to build the case. But if people at the Pentagon were investigating her identity, that meant her mission had attracted attention from the very people she was trying to expose. That's actually good news, she said after a moment. How is that good news? Because it means they're scared. They're scrambling to figure out who I am and who sent me. That kind of panic leads to mistakes. Emily managed a tight smile. Let them dig. By the time they figure it out, I'll have already handed the evidence to federal prosecutors." Burke didn't look reassured, but he nodded. "I'll get these documents secured, and I'll keep monitoring for threats against the witnesses. So far, everyone who testified is being left alone, but that could change. It will change, probably soon. Stay alert." They separated again, Burke taking the folder of maintenance records, Emily returning to her patient care responsibilities. The afternoon passed with routine medical procedures. Nothing dramatic or urgent. Drew Anderson was awake and lucid, his parents having arrived from Nevada. Emily checked on him briefly, noting his improved color and stable vital signs. At 1700, as her shift was ending, Hospital Corpsman First Class Gregory Walsh approached her near the supply closet. "Dr. Stratton, got a minute?" Gregory was 38, a senior corpsman with 15 years of service. Emily had worked alongside him dozens of times, but never developed more than professional rapport. He was competent, reliable, and remarkably unremarkable. "Of course. What do you need?" Gregory glanced around, ensuring no one was within earshot. "I heard about what happened yesterday in the cafeteria. Wanted to say I respect what you did, taking a stand against Whitaker. That took guts. Thank you. But I also wanted to warn you, Whitaker has friends. People who are going to be angry that you're pressing charges." Gregory's voice dropped lower. "I've been here longer than you. I know how things work. Sometimes it's better to let things slide, even when they're wrong, because fighting the system just gets you hurt." Emily studied his expression, trying to read whether this was genuine concern or veiled threat. "I appreciate the advice, but I can't let assault slide. That's not who I am." "I figured you'd say that," Gregory sighed. "Just watch your back, okay? Not everyone is happy about this investigation." He walked away before Emily could respond. The warning lingered, ambiguous enough to be either friendly caution or intimidation, impossible to categorize with certainty. She left Building 3 as dusk settled over Camp Pendleton. The drive to her off-base apartment took 20 minutes through traffic. She'd rented a small one-bedroom place in Oceanside, deliberately modest, the kind of housing a civilian contractor on a nurse's salary would choose. Inside, she locked the door, drew the curtains, and activated the hidden camera system she'd installed 6 months ago. 4 angles covering entry points and the main living space. If anyone came looking for her, she'd have video evidence. Then she opened her laptop and accessed the encrypted server where she'd been storing evidence for 8 months. Hundreds of documents, thousands of photographs, testimony from reluctant witnesses who'd spoken to her on condition of anonymity, financial records showing offshore accounts and suspicious transactions, equipment manifest revealing the pattern of theft. She added today's information: Burke's meeting, the maintenance records showing premeditated equipment substitution, Colonel Bennett's tacit support, the Pentagon's interest in her background. The case was nearly complete. Another few days of documentation, one more piece of evidence linking the theft operation to its ultimate beneficiary, and she'd have everything needed for indictments that would reach all the way to the top of the conspiracy. Her phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. "You should have apologized when you had the chance." Emily stared at the message. Not from Whitaker, he was under investigation and wouldn't be that stupid, but from someone in his network. Someone warning her that the assault in the cafeteria was just the beginning. She screenshotted the message, added it to her evidence files, then blocked the number. Intimidation tactics only worked on people who were afraid. Emily had stopped being afraid in Helmand Province when she'd held 23 Marines together through 11 hours of hell. This was nothing compared to that. She made dinner, simple pasta and vegetables, eating mechanically while reviewing her next steps. Tomorrow she'd interview Drew Anderson officially, getting his testimony about the equipment failure on record. She'd also need to meet with Corporal Ryan Mitchell and the other witnesses, ensuring they understood the protection Burke was providing. And she'd continue watching Lieutenant Colonel Ashford, waiting for him to make the mistake that would expose the full network. Across the base, in officers' quarters, Lieutenant Derek Shaw sat in his small apartment staring at his phone. A message from Ashford glowed on the screen. "Destroy all records related to equipment transfers. Immediate. Confirm when complete." Shaw's hands trembled slightly. He'd known this day would come eventually. known that stealing medical supplies and falsifying records would catch up to him. He'd told himself he was just following orders, just doing what was necessary, just taking advantage of a broken system that wasted resources anyway. But now a Marine had nearly died because of equipment that Shaw had personally certified as functional when he knew it was expired and dangerous. Now a civilian nurse was asking questions and building a case. Now everything was falling apart. He could destroy the records, cover his tracks, hope that Emily Stratton's investigation stalled before finding the connection between him and Ashford. Or he could do something he'd never seriously considered before. He could tell the truth. Shaw pulled out a different phone, dialed a number he'd memorized but never called. Base Security Office, Chief Clark speaking. This is Lieutenant Shaw. I need to report criminal activity. There was a pause. What kind of criminal activity, sir? Theft, falsification of records, equipment tampering that resulted in injury to military personnel. Shaw's voice strengthened as he committed to the decision. I have information about a theft ring operating on Camp Pendleton. I'm willing to provide testimony in exchange for consideration. Another pause, longer this time. Sir, that's a serious allegation. Are you certain you want to make this report? I'm certain. I'll be at your office in 20 minutes with documentation. Shaw ended the call before he could change his mind. He gathered the files he'd kept hidden in his wall safe, insurance he'd maintained in case he ever needed leverage or protection, shipping manifests, bank account information, email correspondence with Ashford coordinating the theft and resale of medical supplies. Everything that would destroy Norman Ashford's career and expose the network to its highest levels. He was crossing a line that couldn't be uncrossed. His own career was finished. He'd face court-martial, probably serve time in military prison, but at least he'd stop being part of something that put Marines at risk. At least he could look at himself in the mirror again. 23 minutes later, Lieutenant Derek Shaw walked into the base security office and handed Chief Petty Officer Dennis Clark a folder containing evidence of the largest theft operation in Camp Pendleton's history. What Shaw didn't know was that Chief Clark was the security coordinator for the conspiracy he was trying to expose. Clark accepted the folder with professional courtesy, promised to forward it to the appropriate authorities, and assured Shaw that his cooperation would be noted. Then, the moment Shaw left the office, Clark called Norman Ashford. We have a critical problem. Shaw just turned himself in with documentation of the entire operation. Ashford's voice on the other end was ice cold. Did he provide physical evidence? He handed me a folder. I haven't opened it yet, but he claimed it contains shipping manifests, financial records, and email correspondence. Destroy it. All of it. Immediately. That's obstruction. If anyone finds out about the actual operation, we're all going to prison for decades. Destroy the evidence. I'll handle Shaw. Clark hesitated for only a moment. Then he opened his office shredder and began feeding Shaw's carefully maintained insurance files into the machine. Page by page, the evidence disappeared into confetti. By the time the last sheet had been destroyed, Lieutenant Derek Shaw's courage had been reduced to recyclable waste. And Emily Stratton, sitting in her apartment reviewing encrypted files, had no idea that one of the witnesses she'd been counting on had just tried to come forward and been silenced before his testimony could reach anyone who mattered. The war for truth on Camp Pendleton was escalating into something darker than she'd anticipated. The corruption wasn't just financial. It was institutional, reaching into the very systems designed to prevent it. Emily closed her laptop and checked her security cameras one final time. All clear. No threats visible, the night settling into quiet routine. But somewhere in the darkness, people who'd built fortunes on stolen medical supplies were planning their next move. And Emily Stratton, the Medal of Honor recipient who'd saved 23 Marines in Helmand Province, was about to discover that some enemies didn't fight fair, didn't respect rules, and didn't care who got hurt as long as they preserved their power. The investigation was entering its most dangerous phase, the phase where desperate people made terminal decisions. Lieutenant Derek Shaw never made it home that night. At 2,147 hours, his vehicle left the road on a curved section of Highway 76, 3 miles from the base entrance. The car rolled twice before coming to rest in a drainage culvert. Emergency responders arrived within 12 minutes, but Shaw was already gone. The medical examiner would later determine he died instantly from blunt force trauma. The California Highway Patrol classified it as a single-vehicle accident. Driver fatigue, excessive speed on a dangerous curve, no evidence of mechanical failure or alcohol involvement. Just another tragedy in a state where thousands died on the roads every year. Emily learned about it at 0630 the next morning when Allison Gray mentioned it during shift handover. "Did you hear about Lieutenant Shaw? Died in a car crash last night. So awful. He was only 31. Emily's coffee cup paused halfway to her lips. "Derek Shaw from Medical Supply Logistics? Yeah, I didn't know him well, but still. Makes you think about how fragile life is." Allison shook her head sadly. "They're saying he might have fallen asleep at the wheel." Emily set down her cup carefully, her mind already calculating probabilities. Shaw had been one of her targets, someone she'd identified as part of Ashford's network. She'd been planning to approach him about cooperating, using the threat of evidence to flip him against his co-conspirators. Now he was dead, less than 24 hours after Whitaker's exposure had put everyone in the conspiracy on edge. Coincidence? Possible, but Emily had stopped believing in convenient coincidences years ago. She excused herself and headed to an empty stairwell, pulling out her phone to call Burke. He answered on the second ring. "You heard about Shaw?" His voice was grim. "Just now. What are the details?" "Single vehicle accident on 76 late last night. Highway Patrol is calling it driver error, but something feels wrong. I pulled his duty schedule. Shaw left the base at 20:30 hours, which means he crashed less than 90 minutes later. That stretch of road isn't particularly dangerous, and Shaw drove it every day for 2 years. Any witnesses? None. No other vehicles reported in the area. The crash site was discovered by a passing motorist who saw the skid marks." Burke paused. "Emily, if this wasn't an accident, then they're eliminating potential witnesses before we can flip them." Emily's voice was cold with controlled anger. Shaw was vulnerable, lower ranking than Ashford, facing serious charges if the conspiracy got exposed. He was exactly the kind of person who might cooperate to save himself. So they killed him, or scared him so badly that he made a fatal mistake while driving. Either way, the result is the same. One less person who can testify against the network. Emily thought through the implications. We need to protect the other potential witnesses. Anyone else in the conspiracy who might be vulnerable to pressure. I'll start with Corporal Todd Hansen. He's the supply clerk who falsified inventory records. Young, junior enlisted, probably terrified right now. Burke's voice hardened. If they killed Shaw to keep him quiet, they won't hesitate to go after Hansen or anyone else who looks like they might crack. Agreed. Get to Hansen first thing this morning. See if you can convince him to come forward voluntarily, with protection. Emily checked her watch. I need to get back to my shift, but Burke, be careful. These people just demonstrated they're willing to commit murder. So are we looking at a different kind of investigation now? Not just theft and corruption, but homicide. That depends on what the Highway Patrol's accident reconstruction shows. But yes, we need to start treating this as potentially lethal. Emily's tone carried the weight of someone who'd operated in genuinely dangerous environments. Watch your back. Vary your routes. Make sure someone knows where you are at all times. She ended the call and returned to the trauma ward, her mind working through revised threat assessments. The conspiracy had just escalated from financial crimes to potentially murdering witnesses. That changed everything about how she needed to proceed. The morning passed with routine patient care, but Emily's attention remained divided. Drew Anderson was improving rapidly, his parents grateful and hovering. She documented his progress while mentally cataloging everyone connected to the equipment failure investigation. Perry, the Marine who told her about Whitaker's negligence. The 15 witnesses to the rigging failure. Ryan Mitchell and the others who'd testified about the cafeteria assault. All potential targets if the conspiracy decided to eliminate anyone who threatened their operation. At 10:30 hours, Master Gunnery Sergeant Preston Burke appeared at the nurses' station again, his expression darker than Emily had seen before. He gestured toward the empty equipment storage room they'd used yesterday. Once inside with the door closed, Burke's composure cracked slightly. Hansen's gone. I went to his barracks this morning. His roommate said he left late last night, seemed agitated, packed a bag and drove off base. He hasn't reported for duty. His phone goes straight to voicemail. He ran. Emily processed this development, probably panicked after Shaw's death and decided disappearing was safer than staying. Or they grabbed him. Burke's jaw clenched. We don't know if he left voluntarily or under duress. Either way, he's no longer available to testify. That's 2 potential witnesses neutralized in less than 12 hours. Emily leaned against the wall, calculating their remaining options. We need to accelerate the timeline. If they're eliminating witnesses this aggressively, they're planning something bigger. Probably destroying evidence, maybe preparing to shut down the operation and disappear. What about the witnesses from the cafeteria? Mitchell, Warren, the others who testified against Whitaker. They're safer for now. Their testimony is about assault, not the theft conspiracy. Unless Ashford thinks they know more than they do. Emily pulled out her phone, scrolled through her encrypted files. I need to reach out to my handler, request federal protection for the witnesses and authorization to move on Ashford immediately. Your handler? The person who sent me here. The one who can mobilize resources beyond what we can access locally. Emily hesitated, then decided Burke had earned the full truth. I'm not just investigating this theft ring. I'm part of a Department of Defense task force that hunts corruption in military medical systems. We operate with authority that supersedes normal chain of command. Burke absorbed this without visible surprise. So when you're ready to move, you can bring in federal agents, marshals, whoever you need? Exactly, but I need airtight evidence first. Right now, we have documentation of theft and circumstantial evidence of witness tampering. That's not enough to guarantee convictions at the highest levels. We need direct proof connecting Ashford to Shaw's death, or evidence of who's protecting the operation from above. How do we get that proof if they're killing witnesses and destroying records? We force them to expose themselves, create a situation where they have to act, and when they do, we're ready to document everything. Emily's mind was already formulating a plan. I'm going to contact Lieutenant Colonel Ashford directly. Tell him I know about the theft ring and I'm willing to negotiate my silence in exchange for compensation. Burke stared at her. That's insane. You'd be painting yourself as an even bigger target. I'm already a target. Shaw's death proves they know someone's investigating. They just don't know it's me specifically. Not yet. Emily's voice remained calm, clinical. If I approach Ashford pretending to be a corrupt opportunist instead of an investigator, he might try to buy me off or bring me into the conspiracy. Either way, he'll have to communicate with his partners, move money, or take action that we can document. And if he decides it's easier to kill you than pay you, then we'll have evidence of conspiracy to commit murder. And I'll be ready. Emily met his eyes. I've survived worse than Norman Ashford, trust me. Burke clearly didn't like the plan, but he nodded slowly. When are you making contact? Today, this afternoon. I'll request a private meeting to discuss concerning patterns I've noticed in medical supply chains. Professional conversation between colleagues. Emily managed a grim smile. He'll know exactly what I'm really talking about. I'm coming with you. Back up. No, if you're there, he won't talk freely, but you can monitor from a distance. Make sure I walk out of that meeting alive. Emily pulled out a small device from her pocket, no bigger than a button. Recording device. Military grade. I'll wear it during the meeting. Everything Ashford says will be captured. Where did you get that? Same place I got my fake nursing credentials and 8 months of operational funding. The people I work for have resources. Emily pocketed the device. I need to set up the meeting. Can you make sure the witnesses from yesterday stay on base today? Keep them in public areas where they're surrounded by people. I'll handle it. Emily, please be careful. These people have already killed at least one person. They won't hesitate to add you to the list. I know. That's what I'm counting on. Burke left first, and Emily spent the next 20 minutes composing an email to Lieutenant Colonel Norman Ashford. Professional tone, carefully worded to sound like concern rather than accusation, with just enough specificity to make clear she knew about irregularities in medical supply procurement. Lieutenant Colonel Ashford, I'm writing regarding some concerning discrepancies I've observed in medical supply inventory and equipment certification processes. As a trauma nurse, I've noticed patterns that suggest systematic problems requiring immediate attention. I believe this matter should be discussed privately before involving additional personnel. Would you be available to meet this afternoon? I'm flexible on timing and location. Respectfully, Dr. Emily Stratton. She sent the email at 11:15 hours. Ashford responded within 6 minutes. Dr. Stratton, I appreciate you bringing your concerns to my attention directly. I'm available at 1500 hours today. Let's meet in Building 7, Conference Room C. It's private and we won't be disturbed. V/R, LT Colonel Norman Ashford. Emily read the response twice, analyzing every word. Ashford had taken the bait immediately, suggesting a private location away from his main office. He wanted this conversation off the record, away from potential witnesses. That could mean he was planning to assess whether she was a genuine threat or just a naive nurse who'd noticed anomalies without understanding their significance. Or it could mean he was planning something more permanent. She confirmed the meeting time and spent the next 3 hours preparing. The recording device got secured inside her ID badge holder, positioned to capture audio from any angle. She memorized the layout of Building 7, identifying exit routes and areas with security cameras. She sent Burke a text with the meeting details and her personal code phrase. If she texted, "Everything resolved smoothly," it meant she was safe. Any other phrase meant she was in immediate danger. At 14:45 hours, she left the trauma ward and walked across the base toward Building 7. The afternoon sun cast sharp shadows across the pavement. Marines moved about their duties, oblivious to the high-stakes confrontation about to unfold in the administrative building they passed every day. Building 7's third floor was quiet, most personnel at afternoon training exercises or administrative duties elsewhere. Conference Room C sat at the end of a long hallway, deliberately isolated from the main office areas. Emily noted the security camera placements, 2 in the hallway, none visible inside the conference room itself. She knocked once and entered without waiting for a response. Lieutenant Colonel Norman Ashford sat at the head of a long table, his uniform immaculate, his expression professionally neutral. He was alone, which was either a good sign or a very bad one. Dr. Stratton, thank you for coming. Please, sit down. He gestured to a chair opposite him. Emily remained standing. I prefer to stand for difficult conversations. Difficult? Ashford's eyebrows rose slightly. I was hoping this would be a straightforward discussion about administrative procedures. Let's not waste time with pretense, Colonel. You know why I'm here. I know about the medical supply theft. I know about the falsified inventory records. I know about the expired equipment being kept in rotation after replacement supplies were diverted for resale. Emily's voice was calm, direct. What I don't know yet is who else is involved and how high the protection reaches. Ashford's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Calculation. Assessment. Those are serious allegations. Do you have evidence? Enough to trigger a federal investigation that will expose everyone involved. Shipping manifests, financial records, maintenance logs, witness testimony. Emily paused. The question is whether I take that evidence to the authorities or whether we can reach an alternative arrangement. There it was. The suggestion of corruption, the hint that she might be bought. Emily watched Ashford's reaction carefully. He leaned back in his chair, studying her with new attention. An alternative arrangement, that's an interesting phrase. What exactly are you proposing? I'm proposing that I'm a civilian contractor making a civilian salary while watching people around me profit from creative logistics management. I'm proposing that perhaps I've been too quick to judge what might be standard practice in military procurement. And I'm proposing that my silence and cooperation have value that could be compensated appropriately. The lie came easily, delivered with just the right mixture of greed and nervousness. Emily was betting that Ashford had spent 2 years building a network of corrupt personnel, each one brought in through similar negotiations. He'd want to believe she was just another person who could be bought. Ashford stood slowly, walked to the window overlooking the base. His silence stretched for 15 seconds before he spoke. You're either very brave or very stupid to come here with this proposal. I'm practical, and I'm tired of being the only honest person in a system that rewards corruption. Honest person. Ashford turned to face her. You're proposing blackmail. That's not honesty, Dr. Stratton. That's opportunism. Call it what you want. I'm offering you a choice. Bring me into your operation as a partner with appropriate compensation, or watch me take everything I know to federal investigators. You realize that if I were actually running the operation you're describing, threatening me would be extraordinarily dangerous. That people who threaten criminal conspiracies often meet with unfortunate accidents? Emily held his gaze. Like Lieutenant Shaw's accident last night? The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Ashford's professional mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something cold and reptilian underneath. That was a tragedy, driver fatigue on a dangerous road. Was it, or was it convenient elimination of someone who might have cooperated with investigators? Emily took a calculated risk, pushing harder. I'm not Shaw. I'm not scared, and I'm not running. And unlike him, I've taken precautions. Everything I know is documented and stored securely. If something happens to me, it all gets released automatically. So killing me won't solve your problem, it'll just accelerate exposure. Ashford moved away from the window, closer to Emily. Not threatening, but closing distance in a way that was meant to intimidate. You think you're clever, you think you've protected yourself, but you have no idea what you're dealing with. Then educate me, tell me who I'm dealing with, tell me how high the protection reaches. Emily didn't retreat. Or accept that I'm not here to destroy you, I'm here to profit, just like everyone else in your network. For a long moment, Ashford said nothing. He circled the conference table slowly, examining Emily from different angles, trying to read whether she was genuine or playing him. Let's say, hypothetically, that the operation you're describing exists, and let's say I have access to people involved in that operation. What exactly would you want in exchange for your silence? $200,000. Paid offshore, untraceable, and a percentage of future profits from medical supply diversion. Emily named a figure high enough to be credible, but not so high as to be insulting. In exchange, I stop asking questions, I falsify any documentation you need, and I provide cover for future operations through my position in the trauma ward. Ashford smiled thinly. You've thought this through. I've had 8 months to think about it. 8 months of watching other people get rich, while I barely make rent. And what guarantee do I have that once you're paid, you won't just take the money and expose everything anyway? The same guarantee you have with everyone else in your network. Mutual assured destruction. If I expose you, I expose myself as complicit. I'd face charges alongside everyone else. Emily let frustration creep into her voice. Look, I'm not trying to be a hero. I'm trying to be practical. You need someone in the medical department who can facilitate operations and provide cover. I need money. This is a business transaction. Ashford studied her for 5 more seconds, then he nodded slowly. I'll need to consult with my partners. A decision this significant requires agreement from everyone involved. How long? 24 hours. Meet me here tomorrow, same time. I'll have an answer about whether we can accommodate your proposal. He moved toward the door, clearly ending the meeting. And Dr. Stratton, I hope for your sake that you're sincere about this negotiation. Because if you're not, if you're wearing a wire or attempting to entrap me, the consequences will be severe. Emily walked to the door, paused with her hand on the handle. I'm sincere about getting paid. That's all that matters. She left before Ashford could respond, walking down the empty hallway with measured steps. Neither hurrying nor dawdling, just a civilian contractor leaving a routine meeting. The security cameras captured her exit, but that was fine. Let them see her leaving alive and apparently unharmed. Outside Building 7, Emily maintained her composure until she reached the parking lot behind the physical therapy wing. Only then did she pull out her phone and text Burke. Everything resolved smoothly. Meeting again tomorrow, 1500. His response came immediately. Thank God. Debrief at the chapel in 1 hour. Emily spent the intervening time reviewing patient charts in the medical library, a public space with multiple witnesses where no one could approach her without being seen. Her hands remained steady as she typed notes, but her mind raced through everything Ashford had said and not said. He hadn't denied the conspiracy, hadn't claimed ignorance or innocence. He'd engaged with her proposal immediately, treating it as a legitimate negotiation rather than an outrageous accusation. That confirmed he was running the operation exactly as she'd suspected. But he'd also been careful not to admit anything specific. Nothing he'd said would be sufficient for prosecution on its own. She needed him to make concrete offers, name co-conspirators, provide details that could be corroborated and prosecuted. Tomorrow's meeting would be more dangerous. Ashford would have consulted with his partners, possibly run background checks on her, definitely discussed whether to bring her into the conspiracy or eliminate her. She'd pushed him hard, left him no comfortable middle ground between cooperation and confrontation. Now she'd see which option he chose. At 16:30 hours, she arrived at the base chapel. Burke was already inside, pacing between the pews like a caged animal. The moment Emily entered, he spun to face her. "Tell me everything, every word, every gesture, every detail." Emily described the meeting, the conversation, Ashford's reactions and responses. Burke listened with absolute attention, occasionally asking clarifying questions. When she finished, he was silent for a long moment. "He's going to try to kill you. Maybe. Or he might actually try to bring me in. I gave him good reasons to believe I'm genuinely corrupt." Emily sat down in a pew. "Either way, tomorrow's meeting will force him to commit. If he tries to kill me, we'll have proof of conspiracy to murder. If he tries to recruit me, we'll have him on tape, offering to bring me into a criminal enterprise. Unless he searches you for wires before the meeting, then I'll tell him I'm refusing to negotiate without protection and I'll walk out. The point is to force him into a position where he has to choose between actions that both expose him." Emily pulled out the recording device from her ID badge, handed it to Burke. "Download this, make 3 copies, store them in separate secure locations. That conversation isn't enough to prosecute, but it establishes that Ashford engaged with accusations of corruption without denying them." Burke pocketed the device. "I also have news. I talked to Corporal Ryan Mitchell this morning. He's been receiving threatening messages since testifying against Whitaker. Nothing specific, just vague warnings about consequences for disloyalty and watching his back. From who? Anonymous numbers, untraceable. But the timing suggests Whitaker's friends are starting to push back." Burke's expression darkened. "Mitchell's scared, but he's standing firm. Says he won't recant his testimony regardless of threats." "Good. That's character. Make sure he's not alone at any point. Assign him to duties where he's always surrounded by witnesses." "Already done. Same with Lindsay Warren and Jackson Whitley. They're all on details that keep them in public areas during duty hours." Burke hesitated. "Emily, there's something else. I got a call from my contact at Quantico, the one who found the alert on your personnel file. He said someone from the Department of Defense Inspector General's office has been asking questions about you. Wanted to know why your background is sealed, who authorized your presence at Camp Pendleton, and what investigation you're conducting." Emily's mind raced through implications. The Inspector General getting involved could be good or bad. Good if it meant legitimate oversight was finally paying attention to Camp Pendleton. Bad if it meant someone in the conspiracy had connections high enough to trigger an IG inquiry designed to expose and shut down her investigation. "Did your contact give them information?" "He gave them nothing, told them he didn't have clearance to access your file and referred them to higher authority." "But Emily, if the IG is sniffing around, that means someone powerful is feeling threatened by your presence here. Or someone powerful wants to stop the investigation before it reaches them." Emily stood, began pacing. Ashford said he needed to consult with his partners. I assumed he meant other people on base. But what if his partners include people at the Pentagon? People with enough authority to trigger an IG investigation? Then you're not just fighting local corruption, you're fighting institutional protection from the top of the military hierarchy. Which means I need to move faster than they can react, force the confrontation before they can shut me down through official channels. Emily checked her watch. "I'm meeting with Colonel Bennett in an hour to update him on the investigation. He needs to know that tomorrow's meeting with Ashford could be the trigger point for everything. Be careful what you tell Bennett. If the conspiracy reaches high enough, you don't know who might be feeding information upward. Bennett's clean. I've verified his financials, his connections, his service record. He's not part of this." Emily's voice carried certainty. "But you're right that we need to be careful. From now on, assume every communication is monitored and every meeting could be compromised." Burke nodded grimly. "One more thing. I pulled Shaw's autopsy preliminary report. It's not official yet, but the medical examiner noted some anomalies." What kind of anomalies? Bruising patterns that don't match the crash injuries. Marks on his wrists, consistent with restraints. And trace evidence under his fingernails suggesting he struggled with someone shortly before the crash. Burke's voice was cold. The medical examiner is treating it as suspicious death pending further investigation. Emily absorbed this information. Shaw hadn't just died in an accident. He'd been murdered, probably restrained and forced off the road to make it look like driver error. The conspiracy wasn't just eliminating witnesses through intimidation. They were literally killing people who threatened to expose them. That changes everything. We're not investigating theft anymore, we're investigating homicide. Emily's tone hardened. I need to contact my handler immediately. This operation requires federal law enforcement involvement now. How do you contact them? Secure phone, encrypted connection. I'll do it from my apartment tonight. Emily moved toward the chapel exit. Burke, thank you for everything you've done, but from this point forward, you need to maintain distance from me. If things go badly tomorrow, I don't want you caught in the fallout. Absolutely not. I'm not abandoning you when things get dangerous. I'm not asking you to abandon me. I'm asking you to protect yourself and the witnesses. If Ashford realizes you're working with me, he'll target you next. Emily's voice softened slightly. You have a wife, Burke. You have 30 years of honorable service. Don't throw that away because I need backup. My wife would never forgive me if I let someone fight alone when I could have helped. Burke crossed his arms. I'm in this until the end. That's not negotiable. Emily studied his stubborn expression and recognized someone who wouldn't be persuaded by logic or appeals to self-preservation. Fine, but you follow my lead. When I say run, you run. When I say back off, you back off. Understood? Understood. They left the chapel separately again, Burke first, Emily waiting her customary 5 minutes. The late afternoon sun painted Camp Pendleton in golden light, beautiful and peaceful. Thousands of Marines going about their duties, training for missions most would never face, trusting that the institution they served would protect them. That trust was being betrayed by people like Ashford, people who saw the military as a source of profit rather than a sacred obligation. Emily had spent 7 years as a Force Recon corpsman, precisely because she believed in that sacred obligation, believed that when a Marine reached for medical supplies in combat, those supplies would be there. Shaw's death proved how far the conspiracy was willing to go to protect their profits, and tomorrow's meeting would prove whether Emily could outmaneuver them or whether she'd become the next convenient accident. She returned to her apartment as dusk fell, activated her security system, and pulled out the encrypted satellite phone she kept hidden behind a false panel in her closet. The device looked like a standard smartphone but connected through military channels that couldn't be intercepted by conventional means. She dialed a number she had memorized 4 years ago. The call connected after 2 rings. Verification code. The voice was electronically distorted, gender ambiguous. Shadow 6, Echo Tango 79er. Emily's response activated the authentication protocols. Verified. Status report. The investigation has been compromised. Local conspiracy has escalated to homicide of potential witnesses. I've made contact with the primary target and am meeting him tomorrow to force his hand. Requesting immediate standby for federal arrest teams and witness protection protocols. Negative on immediate deployment. Your investigation hasn't been officially sanctioned yet. We're still waiting for Pentagon approval to move on Camp Pendleton. Emily's blood went cold. What do you mean, not sanctioned? I've been operating here for 8 months under authorized deep cover. Your cover was authorized. Your investigation was approved as intelligence gathering only. Any enforcement action requires sign-off from DoD leadership, and that approval has been delayed. Delayed by who? Unknown. But someone at the Pentagon is blocking the authorization. We suspect they're connected to the conspiracy you're investigating. Then I'm operating without backup in hostile territory against a network that's willing to commit murder. Emily's voice remained calm, despite the rage building inside her. You sent me here to build a case, and now you're telling me I can't act on it? We're working the political channels, but until we get approval, you're on your own for operational support. Continue gathering evidence, but do not engage in direct confrontation without backup. It's too late for that. I've already forced a confrontation. Tomorrow I'm meeting with the primary target, and he's either going to try to recruit me or kill me. I need federal agents on standby regardless of approval status. There was a long pause on the encrypted line. "We can't provide official support, but unofficially, if you transmit evidence of capital crimes, we can use that to bypass the approval delay. Give us murder on tape, and we can move immediately. So I need to survive long enough to get Ashford to incriminate himself on recording, while also avoiding being killed by a conspiracy that's already murdered at least one witness. Is that the operational guidance?" That's the reality of working in institutional corruption. The system protects itself. The voice paused. Shadow 6, you knew this mission was high risk when you accepted it. You knew you might be operating without support if things went wrong. I knew. I just hoped the people who sent me here would have my back when it mattered. We do have your back, but we're fighting the same institutional resistance you are. Give us the evidence we need to bypass that resistance, and we'll come in with everything we have. Emily ended the call without responding. The encrypted phone went back into its hiding place. She stood in her dark apartment, staring at nothing, processing the impossible position she'd been placed in. No backup, no official support. A conspiracy that reached into the Pentagon itself, blocking authorization for the very investigation that threatened to expose it. And tomorrow she'd walk into a meeting with a man who'd already proven he was willing to murder witnesses. She could abort, could walk away from the investigation, disappear into another identity, let someone else fight this battle. Her handler had said continue gathering evidence, which was code for don't get yourself killed attempting something without support. But Emily hadn't survived Helmand Province by playing it safe. She'd survived by making the hard choices, by doing what needed to be done regardless of the personal cost. 23 Marines were alive, because she'd held a position for 11 hours when anyone sane would have retreated. This was no different. Marines were dying because someone was stealing the equipment that could save them. Shaw was dead because he'd tried to expose that theft. Hansen was missing, probably dead as well. And if Emily walked away now, the conspiracy would just adapt, continue operating, continue profiting from the blood of the people they were supposed to protect. She couldn't accept that, wouldn't accept it. Tomorrow she'd walk into that meeting, she'd wear a recording device, she'd force Ashford to commit on tape. And when she had evidence of murder and conspiracy, she'd transmit it to every authority she could reach, bypassing the Pentagon blockage through sheer overwhelming documentation. If she died in the process, at least the evidence would survive, at least the truth would eventually surface. Emily checked her security cameras one final time, then sat down at her laptop to review everything she'd gathered over 8 months. Every document, every photograph, every piece of testimony. She compiled it all into a single encrypted package with automated distribution protocols. If she didn't log in to disable the countdown every 12 hours, the package would automatically transmit to 50 different recipients across federal law enforcement, congressional oversight committees, and investigative journalists. Her insurance policy, the thing that made killing her counterproductive because her death would trigger exposure anyway. She hoped Ashford was smart enough to realize that, but she prepared for the possibility that he wasn't. Across the base, in Building 7's administrative offices, Lieutenant Colonel Norman Ashford sat at his desk reviewing security camera footage from that afternoon's meeting. He'd had cameras installed in Conference Room C months ago, hidden devices that didn't appear on any official inventory. The meeting with Emily Stratton played on his monitor, showing her calm demeanor, her calculated negotiation, her apparent willingness to join the conspiracy. He watched it 3 times, analyzing every word, every gesture, looking for tells that would indicate whether she was genuinely corrupt or playing him. His phone rang, the special line he only answered for one person. "I watched the footage you sent," the voice said. Ashford didn't know the speaker's real name, had never met them in person, knew them only as Shepard. "What's your assessment?" "She's either genuinely opportunistic or she's an extremely skilled operative running a long-term investigation." Ashford paused the footage on Emily's face. "Either way, she's a threat that needs to be eliminated. Can you buy her? Bring her into the operation?" "Not safely. Even if she's genuinely corrupt, she knows too much. She's documented our procedures, identified our network, connected patterns that took us years to obscure. Bringing her in just gives her more evidence to use against us later. Then handle it, same as Shaw. Make it clean, make it look accidental, and make sure there's no connection back to us." "Understood. I'll arrange it during tomorrow's meeting." "Good. And Ashford, this is becoming messy. Shaw, the missing clerk, Now this nurse. You need to shut down operations for at least 6 months after this is handled. Let everything cool down before resuming. 6 months of lost revenue is better than life in prison. We've made $43 million over 2 years. That's enough to justify a temporary pause while the heat dies down. Shepard's voice hardened. Clean up this mess. Eliminate the threat. Then we go dormant until it's safe to resume. The call ended. Ashford deleted the recording from his hidden cameras, removed the storage device entirely, and placed it in his office safe. Then he pulled out a different phone and made a call to someone who specialized in making problems disappear permanently. The arrangements took 15 minutes. By the time he finished, Emily Stratton's death had been planned, resources allocated, contingencies prepared. Tomorrow at 1500 hours, she would walk into Conference Room C for a meeting she'd never leave. And Camp Pendleton would be one step closer to returning to the status quo that had made Ashford and his partners rich. Emily arrived at building 7 15 minutes early, positioning herself where she could observe everyone entering and exiting. The recording device sat secured in her ID badge holder again, but this time she carried a backup transmitter sewn into the lining of her jacket. Burke monitored from a vehicle in the adjacent parking lot, ready to intervene if she transmitted the emergency signal. At 14:58 hours, she walked down the familiar hallway toward Conference Room C. The security cameras tracked her movement. She'd worn her hair down today instead of the usual ponytail, a deliberate choice that made her look softer, less military. The bruising on her jaw had faded to yellow-green, visible but healing. Lieutenant Colonel Ashford was already inside the conference room. So were 2 other men Emily didn't recognize. Both wore civilian clothes. Both carried themselves with the controlled tension of people comfortable with violence. Dr. Stratton, thank you for coming. These are my associates. Ashford gestured vaguely without providing names. Before we discuss your proposal, we need to ensure this conversation remains private. I'm sure you understand. One of the men stepped forward with a handheld detection device. I'll need to check you for recording equipment. Emily had anticipated this. If you're going to search me, we're done here. I came to negotiate, not to be treated like a criminal. Standard precaution, Ashford said smoothly. Surely you can appreciate our need for security. I appreciate it enough to walk out right now. Emily turned toward the door. When you're ready to treat me like a partner instead of a suspect, call me. Wait, Ashford's voice carried an edge. We can skip the search. Please, sit down. Emily turned back slowly, letting reluctance show on her face before finally taking a seat. The 2 men positioned themselves flanking the door, blocking her exit. The setup was obvious, intimidation through implied threat. So, have you reached a decision about my proposal? Emily kept her voice steady, businesslike. We have, and we're prepared to bring you into our operation with the compensation you requested. Ashford pulled out a tablet, showed her what appeared to be offshore account information. $200,000, transferred within 48 hours of your first facilitation of medical supply diversion, ongoing percentage as discussed. Emily leaned forward, studying the screen. How do I know this is legitimate, that you won't just take my cooperation and then eliminate me like you eliminated Shaw? Shaw's death was an accident. Was it? Because the autopsy preliminary shows restraint marks and evidence of struggle. Emily watched Ashford's face carefully. You killed him because he was going to expose the operation. Now you're offering me money, but how do I know I won't end up in a similar accident the moment I become inconvenient? Ashford's expression remained neutral, but the 2 men behind Emily shifted positions. She felt their presence like pressure against her spine. You have our word that as long as you remain useful and loyal, you'll be protected. Ashford set down the tablet. But Dr. Stratton, let's be clear about something. You came to us with this proposal. You threatened exposure if we didn't bring you in. That put you in a very specific position. Either you're with us completely or you're a threat that needs to be eliminated. There's no middle ground. I understand that. Good. Then before we finalize anything, I need you to demonstrate your commitment. Ashford pulled out a syringe from his jacket pocket, set it on the table between them. This is a lethal dose of potassium chloride. There's a patient in the trauma ward, Corporal Ryan Mitchell. He testified against Staff Sergeant Whitaker. He's become a problem for our organization because he represents the kind of Marine who chooses principles over loyalty. I need you to administer this to him during your shift tonight. Make it look like a medical error. The temperature in the room dropped. Emily stared at the syringe, processing the test Ashford had just presented. He was asking her to commit murder to prove her corruption, to cross a line that would make her complicit in a capital crime. You want me to kill a Marine? I want you to prove you're serious about joining us. Talk is cheap. Anyone can claim they're willing to be corrupt. Actually doing it separates the real players from the people who'll run to the authorities the moment things get uncomfortable. Ashford leaned back. Kill Mitchell, and you're in. Refuse. And, well, you've already figured out what happens to people who threaten us. Emily's hand moved slowly toward the syringe. Her fingers were 2 inches away when she stopped. No. The word fell into silence like a stone into still water. Ashford's expression didn't change. Excuse me? I said no, I'm not killing Ryan Mitchell or anyone else. Emily pulled her hand back, met Ashford's eyes directly. You want to know who I really am? I'm not a corrupt nurse. I'm a federal investigator who spent 8 months documenting every aspect of your theft operation. And you just confessed to murdering Lieutenant Shaw on a recording that's currently being transmitted to 50 federal law enforcement agencies. For 3 full seconds, nobody moved. Then, chaos erupted. The 2 men behind Emily lunged forward. She was already moving, years of combat training translating into fluid motion. She ducked under the first man's grab, drove her elbow into the second man's solar plexus, and was halfway to the door before Ashford could stand. She triggered the emergency signal on her phone as she hit the hallway at a dead run. Behind her, Ashford was shouting into his radio. Security, detain Dr. Emily Stratton immediately. She's attempting to leave Building 7 with classified materials. Emily took the stairs 3 at a time, her phone already connecting to Burke. It's blown. Get the federal agents now. They're already rolling 2 minutes out. Burke's voice was tight with controlled urgency. Where are you? Stairwell, heading for ground level. Emily burst through the door into the main hallway, nearly colliding with 3 security personnel responding to Ashford's call. She veered left, sprinting toward the rear exit. Stop! Base security! She didn't stop. The rear exit was 15 feet away, then 10, then 5. Her hand hit the crash bar, and she was outside, California sunlight blinding after the dim interior. Burke's vehicle screeched into the loading area, passenger door already open. Emily dove inside as Burke accelerated away from the building. Through the rear window, she could see security personnel emerging, confused and uncertain about whether they should be shooting at a fleeing civilian. Did you get it? The confession? Burke's knuckles were white on the steering wheel. Every word. He admitted to Shaw's murder and tried to get me to kill Ryan Mitchell as proof of loyalty. Emily was already pulling up her phone, confirming that the recording had successfully transmitted to all 50 recipients. The evidence is distributed. Even if Ashford destroys the original, copies exist with federal prosecutors, congressional oversight committees, and the FBI. What about the agents you said were rolling? Bluff. I needed you ready to extract me. Emily managed a tight smile. But the recording will trigger genuine federal response within hours. They can't ignore a confession of murder from a military officer. Burke drove toward the main gate, then suddenly changed direction as base security vehicles appeared ahead. We're not getting off base through the front. Service entrance near the physical therapy wing, it's rarely monitored. Emily navigated using mental maps built over 8 months of preparation. 2 blocks east, then south. They reached the service entrance just as Colonel Lawrence Bennett's vehicle pulled across their path, blocking the exit. Burke hit the brakes, and for a moment, Emily thought they'd been caught by Ashford's response. Then Colonel Bennett stepped out, his expression grim but not hostile. Dr. Stratton, or should I say something else? I just received a very interesting audio file forwarded from the Department of Defense Inspector General's office. A confession from one of my officers to murder and conspiracy. Emily stepped out of Burke's vehicle slowly. Sir, I can explain. You're Lieutenant Emily Hartwell, Medal of Honor recipient, declared killed in action 4 years ago to facilitate deep cover investigations into military corruption. Colonel Bennett's voice carried no anger, just weary understanding. The IG's office just cleared everything. Federal agents are en route to arrest Ashford and everyone connected to his network. How did you? The IG was never blocking your investigation. They were protecting it by creating bureaucratic obstacles that made Ashford's Pentagon contacts think they'd successfully shut you down. Meanwhile, you were building an airtight case that couldn't be dismissed or buried. Colonel Bennett gestured toward the base behind them. It's over, Lieutenant. The good guys won. Within 90 minutes, Camp Pendleton transformed into a federal crime scene. FBI agents swarmed Building 7, arresting Ashford as he attempted to flee through a maintenance tunnel. Chief Petty Officer Dennis Clark was apprehended destroying evidence in his office. Corporal Todd Hansen was found alive in a motel in Arizona, terrified but unharmed, and agreed to testify in exchange for protection and reduced charges. The two men who tried to stop Emily in the conference room were identified as private contractors with criminal backgrounds, hired specifically for witness elimination. They cooperated immediately when faced with murder conspiracy charges. By 1800 hours, Emily stood in Colonel Bennett's office with Burke, Captain Sharon Bennett, and a woman she'd never met in person but recognized from photographs. Major General Patricia Montgomery wore civilian clothes, her gray hair cut short, her expression carrying decades of hard decisions. Lieutenant Hartwell, it's an honor to finally meet you face to face. Your work here has been extraordinary. Montgomery extended her hand. 12 people arrested, including 2 Pentagon officials who were providing protection. $43 million in stolen medical supplies recovered or traced. And most importantly, a network that's been operating for years has been completely dismantled. Thank you, ma'am, but I had help. Emily glanced at Burke. Master Gunnery Sergeant Burke risked his career and possibly his life to support this investigation. His actions have been noted. He'll be receiving a commendation. Montgomery turned to Burke. The Corps needs more people like you, Gunnery Sergeant, people who choose integrity over convenience. The next morning, Emily returned to the hospital cafeteria for the first time since Whitaker's assault. 300 Marines were eating breakfast when she entered. The room didn't go silent this time, but conversations quieted as people recognized her. Corporal Ryan Mitchell stood from his table, followed by Lindsay Warren and Jackson Whitley. One by one, Marines throughout the cafeteria rose to their feet, a gesture of respect that transcended rank or duty. Emily's eyes stung unexpectedly. She'd spent 8 months being underestimated, dismissed, treated as insignificant. Now these same Marines were acknowledging her sacrifice and service. Master Gunnery Sergeant Preston Burke appeared beside her. They know who you really are now. Word travels fast on military bases. They know you saved 23 Marines in Helmand Province. They know you spent 8 months investigating corruption that put their lives at risk. And they know you could have walked away but chose to fight instead. I just did my job. You did more than that. You reminded everyone what service actually means. Burke gestured toward the standing Marines. You should probably say something. Emily walked to the center of the cafeteria, the same spot where Whitaker had struck her 3 days ago. At ease, everyone. Sit down, finish your breakfast. Gradually, people returned to their seats, but attention remained focused on her. For 8 months, I worked here under false pretenses. I apologize for that deception, but the mission required it, and the results speak for themselves. Emily's voice carried across the quiet room. 12 people who betrayed your trust have been arrested. The medical supplies that should have been protecting you in training and combat have been recovered. And the system has been reminded that corruption will not be tolerated, regardless of rank or connections. She paused, looking around at the young faces watching her. Marines who would deploy to dangerous places, who would trust their lives to equipment and procedures, who deserved leaders worthy of their sacrifice. Staff Sergeant Whitaker assaulted me because I asked questions about equipment that failed and injured Private Drew Anderson. He thought violence would silence me. Instead, it exposed everything. That's the lesson here. Truth doesn't require volume or aggression, it just requires courage and persistence. Spontaneous applause erupted throughout the cafeteria. Emily nodded once in acknowledgement, then walked to an empty table and sat down to eat breakfast like any other medical personnel on any other morning. Except everything had changed. The quiet nurse with the unremarkable face was gone, replaced by a decorated veteran who'd reminded everyone that heroes didn't always announce themselves. Sometimes they just showed up and did the work that needed doing, regardless of recognition or reward. 3 weeks later, Emily stood on the parade ground as Major General Montgomery presented her with a citation for meritorious service. The ceremony was closed to press, classified like most of her activities, But every Marine on Camp Pendleton who'd witnessed her investigation knew what she'd accomplished. Afterward, Ryan Mitchell approached her. The young corporal looked healthier than he had in the hospital, his training injury fully healed. "Ma'am, I wanted to thank you for protecting us, for exposing the people who were putting us at risk, and for showing me what real courage looks like." "You showed courage too, Corporal, testifying against Whitaker when it would have been easier to stay silent. That matters." "I learned it from watching you," Ryan smiled. "They're making your investigation a case study at leadership school, teaching officers that integrity sometimes requires creativity and sacrifice." Emily hoped that lesson would stick. Hoped that the next generation of leaders would remember that service meant protecting the people under your command, not exploiting them for personal gain. She left Camp Pendleton the next day, reassigned to another investigation in another location where corruption had taken root. Her identity would shift again, her appearance would change, but her mission remained constant. Find the people who betrayed the trust of those who served, and make sure they faced justice. Because 23 Marines had survived Helmand Province because the equipment worked, because Drew Anderson had survived a training accident despite someone's theft and negligence, because Ryan Mitchell and thousands like him deserved leaders who valued their lives more than profit. That was worth fighting for. Worth any price, any sacrifice, any risk. Emily Hartwell disappeared into her next cover identity, leaving behind a base that would never forget the quiet nurse who'd proven that heroes came in unexpected forms, and that justice, though often delayed, eventually found its way home. Up next, 2 more incredible stories are waiting for you right on your screen. If you enjoy this one, you won't want to miss this. Just click to watch. And don't forget to subscribe. It would